We went looking for a strange man in our cemetery. When I was a freshman in high school, I spent almost every lunch break at the St. Clair Cemetery a few minutes from the school grounds. Me and two of my friends would walk down there each day, winding around the trails and talking. We appreciated the peace and quiet that came with this place, as it was almost always devoid of people. When we visited the cemetery, we entered through a large metal gate from the sidewalk. The path wound around the entire property, leading around the plots, down a steep hill and back to the gates. This place was full of headstones belonging to all kinds of the deceased, young, old, rich, poor, and especially dead soldiers. Every time we passed through, we walked by a whole section filled with white crosses, some of them bearing Canadian flags. Just past the war heroes was a fork in the path, leading back towards the edge of the cemetery, next to the road, and a path through the middle of the graveyard. Usually we just walked through the middle of the property, headed back down the hill and out through the gates again. Overlooking the whole area was St. Clair's Church, which was just some standard fare Catholic church with a defunct electronic sign out front. So every day we would set out in our light jackets, or just t-shirts, laughing and talking and walking. It was just me and my friends Lloyd and Daniel. Lloyd was a deceptively athletic kid who could run fast and far. He looked skinny, but he got himself on every sports team he could. He was the most argumentative of us, constantly challenging and prodding and jokingly insulting. There was no winning an argument with him, but for some reason I would always try. Daniel was meek, quiet and pretty smart. When he talked, he knew what he was talking about, but he rarely challenged anyone or spoke his mind. I liked talking to him the most, because he liked to avoid conflict. He liked to get along. But we all enjoyed each other's company, at least enough to band together each day, so we walked. From the very beginning of that fall, we spent the hour talking about whatever nonsense we were into, and pointing out funny names on headstones. On one October day, with a blanket of clouds tucked over the sky, I set out there with just my dog. I walked through those big metal gates, mud in tow, and I began walking the path in silence. I made it all but 20 feet before that silence was broken by a man standing by the curb next to the paved path. I had not noticed him until he spoke, so I was startled, and he seemed to smile at that. "What do you think, huh?" He grinned, leaning on someone's resting place. "What?" I asked softly, not fully enunciating the word. "About God. Do you think this is his plan?" I was standing there, stopped in my tracks, wondering what the man in the red flannel was going on about. "Oh, I don't know." "What do you mean?" "This kid here." He patted the gravestone he had been supporting himself with. "He's 16 years old, or was." He corrected himself. "Oh yeah." I dumbfoundedly forced out. "All around here, I mean. It's just 4-year-olds and 8-year-olds and teenagers, like you." "Yeah, that's too bad," I said in an attempt to actually add to the conversation. "Yeah, you get it. You know. You understand all this bullshit, don't you? You're not one of them, huh?" I nervously smiled and started walking again, giving him a little nod as I passed. "You have a good walk now," he called as I walked a little faster down the path. I went through the usual route, only this time I was a little freaked out by my encounter. He didn't really do anything too alarming, but talking about dead kids in an empty graveyard was a bizarre thing to do. As I made my way through the place, I noticed him meandering through the surrounding plots. He seemed to be checking out the graves, looking at the gifts people had left and reading names. I walked through the middle path, glancing over at him, but he didn't seem to be paying any attention to me. By the time I reached the final stretch leading to the gate, I felt a sense of relief. He seemed pretty harmless, but it was still unsettling to be alone in a cemetery with him. When I got home, which was only a few minutes away, I asked my dad if he had ever seen a weird guy hanging around St. Clair's. Keep in mind that my dad often walked the dog there as well, sometimes with me and sometimes alone. The only reason for this is that we lived in a very boring urban center, and St. Clair's Cemetery is one of the only quiet, empty places nearby. He said that he hadn't seen anything, but he immediately followed up with a question. He asked me what exactly I had seen. I told him about the interaction, saying that it was awkward and strange. He reminded me of the vandalism that had been going on in that area. Someone had smashed up multiple headstones, probably with a sledgehammer, damaging them significantly. He said that if anything, that guy could have been the vandal. I had previously known about the vandalism, but it hadn't crossed my mind until he brought it up. Now, considering myself some sort of fledgling investigator, I went to my room and searched up St. Clair vandalism. I found nothing about damaged headstones, but I found something else entirely. Suspect in St. Clair Evangelical Church fire arrested. Pictured in this article was a tall bald man, looking up at a security camera. Apparently, this guy had set a minor fire in the church, causing some damage to property inside the building. There was no major structural damage, and the place was entirely empty. He had committed this crime in the dead of night, when there was nobody to witness the arson. However, a security camera caught him very clearly, and he was promptly arrested in the days following the fire. This had happened 4 years before I found the article, so it was safe to assume he was a free man at the time. He had only caused a few $1,000s worth of damage, and his problem seemed entirely mental. The Canadian justice system got him psychiatric help, fined him and spat him out onto the street. I studied the picture of the suspect. I didn't get the best look at the graveyard guy, but I knew he was bald, just like the suspect. He seemed shorter in person, and significantly older than the picture, but I couldn't be sure either way. I didn't really know if it was the same guy, but I was desperately hoping it was. This would add such rich folklore to the cemetery, and it would be fun to tell the guys about it. Watch out at St. Clair's, there's a psycho on the loose, vandalizing the place and setting fires left and right. The next day, at lunch, I elected to stay inside with Daniel and Lloyd, going instead to the library. I told them about my encounter, telling them that it was probably this arsonist who set fire to the church, and that he was rambling on about God and dead kids. I showed them the picture of the suspect, whose name was Francis Lavoie, by the way, terrifying, I know. Searching his full name, which was French sounding, we found a video on some third-rate video sharing platform. Other results included 1 or 2 articles about the fire, a Francis Lavoie Facebook page and some irrelevant nonsense. The video looked like an original upload by the man, made in the summer of 2012. It was almost 40 minutes long. The Gospel according to Francis. So we watched it, and it was actually pretty boring. It opened up with some foreign-sounding music, an iMovie-esque title card and some narration over stock images. There's a story about a man, looking out into the world, watching all the corruption, pain and suffering of his fellow man. He looks to the heavens, and he asks God, "Why don't you do anything?" God looked down at the man and answered, "I did do something. I made you." Francis went on to talk about his experiences traveling the world, how he has interacted with every culture, and his journey as a man. He frequently mentioned how the Catholic Church brainwashes its members, including him as a child, and how they prevent people from achieving free will. He seemed bitter about religion being imposed on him as a child, but he presented his case in a calm way. Obviously, we were bored to tears by all the talk about churches and answering the questions of the universe and so on. We watched a few minutes, paused it and immediately started talking about what this guy must be up to. After killing Lloyd, the man walked to the Jeep he had parked away from the shed, in the hopes that one of us would come back and assume he wasn't there. He drove the Jeep to the side of a busy road, about half an hour from the cemetery. He parked the car, crouched behind the hood and waited. When a large truck came barreling down the road, he leapt out from behind the car, letting the truck hit him. For some reason, he left his gun behind in the shed. It turns out the man, who was really David Bergman, was a whole other kind of crazy. He was a former member of the church, before he had a serious mental breakdown. He suffered paranoid delusions, believing that the church was harassing him, and that agents were being sent to follow him. He had vandalized church property in an attempt to defy his harassers, and he had been hanging around the church in hopes of gathering evidence to prove his case against them. While we were looking for Francis Lavoie, he thought we were looking for him.